Hi, welcome to this first episode of the Skillup Podcast. Today we'll be talking to Joost Walterbos from the Hedgehog Company. He's a co-founder at the Hedgehog Company, which he founded together with some friends right after study a few years ago. They thought we can make a very big impact on the environment if we start helping other companies, making sure that their operations and their practices, their services have a positive impact on society in general, but mainly on the environmental front. It's a very technical field that we hear all sorts of things about throughout the day. And that's also the reason that we wanted to talk to Joost, because we wanted to understand this field a little better, to actually know how to have a better positive impact. Joost explains to us all the legislation that involves this field, how to work with the new frameworks, how to get going and make sure that you or our company improves on the environmental impact that we make. Hope this gives you a lot of insight in this technical field. We have these conversations purely out of curiosity. So we hope that it not only feeds our curiosity, but helps you along as well and gives you some inspiration. Have a lot of fun, and we'll see you in the conversation. Start it off. We're live?
Trap off.
Okay. Well, great having you here, Joost. Thanks for coming.
Much. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're hoping for a very interesting conversation about your business, and we actually know each other from this building, this office building. So I'm very happy to have you here as a neighbor.
Yes, and, thank you very much, Oscar. Of course, happy to be here and give you a little insights on the matter that we will discuss today.
Yeah, man. I hear your stories in the hallway, of course, and I always think this is one hell of a technical field, and I don't always get it. So I thought it might be a good idea to have some a bit more elaborative conversation.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I still think the same. So in that sense,
good. And maybe that's one of the things that makes it interesting as well. But I guess we'll discover it here.
I guess so.
Cool. Hey, just before we dive in, I don't know if all the listeners already know you, but let's assume there's some new people.
Fair enough.
Would you like to give a little bit of an outline of who's Joost?
Yes, of course. Well, my name is Joost, indeed, Joost Walterbos. I'm originally from Nijmegen. Nice, the most beautiful city of the Netherlands, of course. Moved to Amsterdam about 12 years ago for a study which was called Future Planet Studies, which was basically a interdisciplinary study on sustainability. And we were about the second year that the study was actually existing, was the year that we enrolled, or I enrolled. Afterwards, did a master on sustainable business and innovation in Utrecht. Still lived in Amsterdam, and after studying, decided to start our own business. Speaking on we and our, because my two fellow entrepreneurs in our organization are I know these guys for the same amount of time, 11 years. We started the bachelor together. And already decided quite early that we wanted to start this business together to become a decent competitor for the average consultant who is out there, and which we believe should be a bit more action-driven and a bit more ambitious.
Okay.
So our company started over 3 years ago, Hedgehog Company, with the goal of helping small medium enterprise, but also startups and corporates in implementing sustainability and become sustainable. So we started a lot in the nitrogen crisis in the Netherlands, helped a lot of construction companies, construction projects, big and small. and then moved on to more comprehensive sustainable analysis. So from carbon footprinting to full life cycle assessments. And the life cycle assessment is currently our main weapon in assessing environmental issues. Basically takes the approach of a whole life cycle. So we look at production, we look at use phase, we look at even before production, the mining processes, the impact of materials, and then we look at the use phase and the end of life phase, and even value, some kind of, making the circle, closing the loop, basically.
Yeah.
Well, the LCA can be adopted on both company level, on product level, on construction product level, building
LCA?
level. LCA. LCA indeed is the what's the abbreviation for life cycle assessment.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right.
So indeed, long story short, our company, we thought we help companies implementing sustainability, but then we realized quite quickly to know where to go, you need to know where you are. Hence adopting the LCA as the analysis to know where a company is before you want to know where to go.
Yeah, of course. Sounds very logical to approach it like that.
You do put your GPS on first when you start up Google Maps, right? Because otherwise...
Yeah. It's not for nothing that old maps used to have like this button where it says you're here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're here indeed.
Sounds like a good approach. I think you stole that approach very nicely from the people that found out.
Yeah,
nice.
we did.
Hey, you already mentioned you started the company because you thought, okay, the consultants that we see, we'd like to have them a bit more action driven, a bit more ambitious.
Yeah. It's it was a bit of a, I don't know how to say. Maybe it came from some anecdotes which passed by on our studies, where the general note was that a lot of, especially corporates, maybe also some SMEs. By the time, I'm speaking 10 years ago, of course. Basically commissioned some consultant to write a nice report on how to implement sustainability. And then at the moment that the report was finished, the CEO would receive it, or the CMO or CFO, whatever. Mm-hmm. They would receive the report. They would be like, nice, don't even open it, put it in a drawer, rest it there. And then if, for example, a Greenpeace would pass by and say like, you're done nothing on sustainability, they would say, hey, we have a nice report here stating exactly what we're doing. Yeah. With no implementation. And we really believe that, sustainability, it's boring for you out there, but when you're actually in it, it's actually really nice and really valuable, also financially valuable in the long run for your company. So we believe that we could bring it on a different way, take a different approach, more action-driven, more pragmatic, more, happy and ambitious, so to say. So that it's easier to implement and easier to understand what it is actually that we advise on companies. So I think that's the main reason.
Yeah, sounds like a very cool approach and a cool reason to actually do it. And sounds like a big adventure also to start right after your studies. How was that?
Yeah, that was fun indeed.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. Yes, we had some. You come from studies and you think like, well, I've studied this, let's do it. But then really finding out that the real world is a lot different than the study environment that we were in. Obviously, the studying it was on the university, so it's a lot more theoretical. You come at the end of the year and you need to report on your taxes, and you're like, I didn't study this.
Yeah.
So it was a really fun journey. But I think we managed to grow from only 2 to 15 in 3 years, having done a lot of projects that we're really proud of, helped a lot of almost corporate companies, from startups with product innovations to or near corporates, with really implementing sustainable practices. And then also, I mean, we do it on the strategic level. We also help the marketing department to translate their environmental impact into marketing communication material, and also on the product level help the product design team with these specific data points that we can provide to them to make really like specific targeted environmental improvements on their products. So it's a really wide range of projects that we're really doing, but it all revolves around this insight into your environmental data.
Very cool. And what makes me very curious is what ways have you found to actually get these reports to be more action driven, or to take the step after the report, or how do you approach that now?
Well, that's funny that you ask, because I think that in general this approach is trying to not report too much at all. Yeah. So we do, I mean, the LCA, the measurement method, the life cycle assessment is an ISO standard. So with doing these measurements and doing this assessment, we always report on the ISO standard.
ISO standard is
the ISO is the International Standardization Organization. So most people would know it from ISO 9000, for example, your quality management, or ISO 27000 for your information. Well, the ISO 14000 family is everything about environmental management systems.
Got it.
And the life cycle assessment approach is one specific part of that family, so to say. And so we report according to that standard, of course. But then when translating it to the organization and translating it to, for example, some adaptations in the product level, we simply sit down with the product team, either online or on site, and just go through our results, through our findings. And I mean, they know everything about their product. Then they know everything about the technical performance that it needs to keep, at least.
Yeah.
Then you have some people there who are completely into the supply chain. Let's say the supply chain manager. They know everything from, okay, I can get this over there for that price, etc., etc. And then you have us, and we have the whole environmental insight. And then you just, with the three, you're just on an open discussion, and you come with the best results. Not us reporting on, you should do this and this and this, because if I give them some advice on, you should change this material for this material, and the guy on the product team is like, well, it doesn't have the same technical performance. I couldn't know, because I'm not the product design team.
Of course.
We believe in that approach, which is way more cooperative with the company. And I mean, I'm speaking now on product level, but we do this on portfolio level, investment level. We do this on the strategic level with the management teams. Really depends on the project that we're doing.
Yeah.
Of course, also with architects and with building engineers.
Yeah.
When we do it for a building, so it's really nice also, because it's so we have so much variation in our projects.
Can imagine.
Keeps you sharp.
Yeah. I think the variation and just the insight in both construction and product development, whichever kind it might be.
Indeed. And it sounds also, I mean, it may sound a bit weird, that we do all these things, but in the end, everything is a building block to the next thing. If I speak about a building is a construction of multiple construction materials. If I take all the LCA's results on the construction materials, put them together, add some energy for a crane or something, and you have a building. Yeah. Same goes with the, if I have multiple products, then I come up to the company level, adding some overhead energy input, of course. Same goes again for the, let's say, private equity portfolio at multiple companies, and you have a portfolio. So it's every time it's a small system that we assess, put them together, and you have the big system, or vice versa. First take the big system, cut it up in small pieces, and you come up to the small system. So it's again, really depends on what the commissioner or the person that we are speaking to, what's his role and what's his demands, what's the purpose of the whole project.
Makes a lot of sense. And if you're doing an analysis, do you always, let's say you have one product analysis, you do one product life cycle, I guess.
Yep.
Let's say you do a whole company. Do you do every product all the way to the lowest level, or do you also do more high lower definition analysis? Let's say.
Yeah. Again, depends on the budget, depends on the purpose of the project. I mean, we see a lot of times that, you don't want to, tell a company that is intrinsically motivated to become a more sustainable company and just tell them like, oh, okay, well, we should do everything. And then, in the end, they're with they need to make available a budget that would the CFO make fall over from his chair, so to say.
Yeah.
So we try to cut it up into smaller pieces. So, for example, if just a anecdote, one of our customers has a product portfolio of 180 plus products, and they're more intrinsically motivated than anything else. So we say let's cut it up. Just take 6 products that are more or less representative for the whole product portfolio that we can have a lot of insights from, and then do a overall assessment on the operations, and then put those together and then extrapolate the results from those 6 products to the whole product portfolio, so that you have a very educated guess, so to say, of the product portfolio and also of your own operations that are actually contributing then to the impact of the product portfolio.
Got it. And I would imagine in the first 6 products you would learn a lot about what really works and what are the costs and what are the benefits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then that's the base year, the benchmark year, so to say. And then next year it's learning from those 6 products, what was the highest impact, where are the environmental hotspots. So there's a strategy on those hotspots right now, and at the same time we're now going to second year, and now we're saying, okay, let's go from 6 products, let's go to 15 products, and then just sharpen create a more detailed image of the whole portfolio.
Got it.
So really go there step by step, both on quality as on the strategic level. So that's
very nice. Yeah, that sounds like a very cool way, and you get so much granular insight into the companies and stuff as well.
You don't even want to know. It's really interesting. I mean, for us it's interesting, but it's also really fun to show the results to the product team, to the CEO, because normally what are you managing on? You're managing on costs and on revenues and on FTEs. And now you just get a whole new set of data that is actually telling you something about your product or your organization, which is just in general, I could say it's kind of mind-blowing for the CEO or for the person that we're reporting to or showing our results to, what these insights show them. It's always fun to see. Yeah.
I can even imagine you would uncover whole new things about the supply chain that weren't inside at all.
Indeed. And it's also fun. I mean, and a lot of times you're you're confirming some kind of gut feeling of where the environmental impact of an organization is.
Yeah.
But actually a lot of times it's also a very counterintuitive result, and then the CEO or the product engineer is like, whoa, is my impact there? I thought it was there, So it's really fun to see a lot of times,
But that makes it all the more interesting.
Yes.
If it was only confirming an intuition,
then it would
that's
be
always
boring.
For sure. Yeah,
and we would be a dying breed, I guess, because then we're not necessary.
Yeah, In a way, I guess, but just having those things being super counterintuitive. What are some things that you've encountered where you thought like, I would have never expected this?
Well, I can say we're working with this. Of course, I need to be careful of how to put the information, but we're working with a company that is in electronics, And I've written my master thesis years ago was on the circular economy for mobile phones. And I really dived deep into the subject, like really deep. There is a lot. I mean, in the electronics, we need to produce these chips, right? These computer chips, and there's a lot of very specific kinds of rare earth materials that we call them.
Yeah.
Are used on these computer chips.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's like very small volumes, very small weights, but they come from everywhere around the world. You know, they come, like a large part comes from China, a lot comes from Australia, from the US, South Africa. One of the worst ones for your battery, cobalt, it comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, fueling a big war there in the 90s and the early 2000s. So, you know, it's very, it's a part of the economy that I didn't know yet, and I think a lot of people still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that there's all these like very small rare earth materials, we were kind of expecting that the computer chips would be the biggest impact in these electronic products. But then in the end, it was just, which is logic in the end, but it was the housing of the products, because obviously that has a way larger volume than these small computer chips. And then it's on weight based or volume based. I mean, if I would have a computer chip the same size as the housing of a product, of course, then the impact would be there. But the computer chips are quite small, so so that was an insight for me that it was kind of counterintuitive. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that is for me as well. I do hear the stories here and there about the heavy metals here and there,
exactly.
But I wouldn't. Was it plastic housing or just any housing would go?
Well, it was plastic housing indeed, but it would be any housing would be the highest impact.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that is counterintuitive indeed.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it also goes for, I mean, for example, we're assessing some service companies, doing any service, and then you have to see like, okay, where is the impact? Because I mean, a service directly doesn't have a embodied carbon. I mean, it's not produced in a factory, but it does have some impact somewhere around, somewhere down the chain. So those are also very interesting, because you really need to dive and really find out, okay, what is this service actually doing before you can start even to do the analysis.
Yeah.
And then you see sometimes, for example, you're really focused on that service, and then you start assessing everything, and then you find out that actually the canteen is the one that has the largest impact, because they're eating a lot of meat. Yeah, okay. We're not searching in that direction yet, but now we do. So meat-free Mondays for the win.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also hear this because we talked a little bit about, so there's companies that you help out get some fundamental insight into their product, supply chain or service or operation of any kind, let's say. I also hear a lot about investment companies having to make sure that the investments that they do have at least a base level of sustainability. Yeah. And you also see a lot of investment companies doing sustainability investment or impact investment, I think they call it.
Yeah.
How does that work? Do they have influence? I can imagine they have influence in the companies they partly own.
Indeed. I mean, influence and power it's quite some sense a difficult subject there. And there's a lot of different constructions, of course, for investments. I mean, you have lending based until equity owned.
Of course.
And it really depends there on the amount of power. But in general, we can say that, some development in that world is the notion of active ownership, which basically states that you as an investor should be active when you're investing in some kind of project or portfolio or company. And, at points that you have the opportunity, you should vote for environmental awareness or some social awareness within the company. But I mean, the investor should have the opportunity and also should have the data. And I mean, that's also a very interesting point over there that we can elaborate on a bit further in this conversation, I think.
Sure.
I also wanted to just take one small step back just to show the importance of actually having the investment, because we spoke earlier, we're searching that throughout the whole supply chain, right? So basically we can divide the supply chain up in 3 scopes. Scope 1 is everything that is directly emitted from your company assets. So you're in this office building, you're putting the heater on, there's a boiler down here in the closet, and it starts burning gas, fuming out carbon emissions, for example. You have 2 people with a car, the cars are company owned, you drive the car, emitting carbon, nitrogen, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Scope 2 is, we can just make it short and say it's electricity. You're using the electricity directly here, but still it's produced off-site. It's produced in a gas-fueled power plant, for example.
Okay.
And then scope 3 is where we go again, right? So you have scope 3 is your whole supply chain. And we divide it in 2. So scope 3 upstream, everything until you buy it or until it's your company. So also, for example, business travel, also your employees traveling in their own car up and down, commuting, homework. And we have scope 3 downstream, which is then everything after it's been at your company. And then, for example, for these investment firms, that's where their impact is, because that's their downstream investing.
Of course.
Now, so you have a general idea of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Now, some of these frameworks are actually demanding investing companies at the moment to report, disclose and report on their scope 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that's kind of weird because for one example, I think it was almost 10 years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, it was the ING, our favorite orange bank, who basically said, well, we are carbon neutral. And what they had was green energy for all their office buildings. Everyone should drive electric within a specific amount of time. All the office buildings that were actually owned were gas-free, so to say.
Yeah.
They're also one of the biggest investors in the oil and gas sector. But then that is scope 3. So basically they're saying we're carbon neutral, but still investing billions in new oil and gas platforms. So it's very important to make this distinction between these 3 scopes at first. Second, to analyze what is it actually, what I said earlier with the service company, for example, you really need to check for what is it where you actually influencing there, then downstream and upstream.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, also some companies do have some kind of relation to an impact upstream or downstream. But when we can say, well, maybe that's 80% of your impact, but you don't really have a power on to change it, only by creating some awareness, maybe sending some emails, hey, I'm an investor in your organization, or I'm in your supply chain for a company, and saying, well, we would like you to diminish your emissions there.
Just an indirect influence, nothing.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And that's a bit of a trade-off, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we can say is everything you use on site, let's say, is one of the clusters. One of the clusters is everything outside the buildings.
Yeah.
For instance, the power used in the data center from
Also,
a software supplier I use.
Yeah.
And then upstream, downstream, everything.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then for your indeed, so for these investment firms, it's really interesting. Again, that's what we stated earlier. It's really there's a large difference between the kind of investment, but in general, thinking about the Paris Agreement in 2030, thinking about some legislation from the European Union, and also thinking about simply, an investor is risk averse, right? So why would I keep investing in these activities that are actually contributing to social unrest, to environmental issues? Why would you keep investing in those things? If you know that actually the companies that you have your investment in are actually contributing to this. So we need to create that data for you to investor to be able to see what you're actually investing in and what that organization or project or asset is contributing to these risks, but also to these compliance risks.
All right. Okay. So any company doing having unsustainable practices, let's say, has a kind of an inherent risk. It sounds like to me, just testing it.
Yeah.
Sounds like they have an inherent risk for any investor, because it could bring anything from, well, the very bad publicity, etc., as well as regulatory issues where your product can't be sold anymore. Can imagine that happens with a lot of car manufacturers where they started upping the standards for filters, etc. Okay, so sounds very logical that as an investor I would want to know, where am I really at with this company, and what's my exposure?
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, there is a big industry around this issue, mostly, I guess, from the big five, mostly from those organizations that made us start our own company.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, having an ESG, we would call it ESG rating, the ESG rater. So ESG is environmental, social, governance.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of, some organizations are specialized in creating these ESG databases, which are basically searching over the internet for a lot of data, put that together, put some kind of methodology on this data to come up with a single ESG score.
For a company?
For a company, yeah. For a company that you would potentially invest in, for example, or a company that's part of your portfolio. So I think they call it ESG investing, basically. Yeah. So it's a very trending thing, and it's a good thing. I mean, what I stated earlier, you should, as an investor, be aware of what you're investing in and what it's contributing to your general risk, for example. Whether it's compliance risks or climate change risk, doesn't really matter. But the question is, of course, these ESG ratings, these scores, they're basically... So I have a lot of data on the internet, for example. So I think they take a lot of information from public reports. So any corporate is basically putting out a financial report for the year 2021, also a social responsibility report or a CSR report. Depends a bit on the company what they're actually reporting or how they call their report. A lot of people call it impact report, for example.
Yeah.
But if I collect all the data global from the internet as an ESG rater, and then they take out these data points, for example, carbon emissions or water pollution, and then they categorize it in a specific sector, for example, so the electronics or the waste industry, energy industry, you name it. Mm-hmm. And then also categorize it according to the region that company is. So, for example, the Netherlands or Western Europe or whatever. And if I then, if I want to invest in a company that does not have this report, then what these ESG ratings basically do, they take all this information and then tell you, okay, so you want to invest in company, let's say an iron producing company in the Netherlands. Not telling you which one, but let's say. Mm-hmm. And so we look at the iron industry. What is this? And what's the energy consumption? What's the average carbon emission? What's their general pollution? What's maybe? And then take the country. So the Netherlands. So what's the energy mix in the Netherlands? What is the average pollution in the Netherlands? What are the labor rights, the working rights, etc.? What is the the distribution of male, female in general? And then take the actual revenues of the company, the iron producer, take these 3 factors, combine them together, and then you get an ESG rating. But what they don't do is actually look at that specific company that they want to do the ESG rating on, and assess what is actually on the company. So if I go back to this iron factory and they are there using the average energy mix, but what if they have decided to install 20,000 solar panels and a nice extra factory that it's cleaning the air from the other factories? I would not take that into account, because that's not in my general data. And I think the nice word for that is to call it a country sector proxy data. So it's really proxy data based on, the general data. And then I'm saying, okay, so because this company is from this country and is in this economic sector, and this is their revenue, so their ESG score is 0.8.
Okay. So the ESG scores, the way you describe them, sound like... yeah, I was gonna call them educated guesses. Yes, but it's an educated guess, but nothing more than that, because the country might as well be blowing out fumes and not have the average filter quality that that region has, that they took for the educated guess data, let's say.
Indeed, yeah.
And do you... Well, I'm kind of gonna guess the answer, but is it also your game that you play, giving educated guesses to companies, or how do you do it?
No, we do, of course. We take assumptions. I cannot, if I assess information from a supply chain, it's very difficult to go beyond tire. The information from tire 2 suppliers is already quite difficult. But our educated guesses are on micro level, and not on a macro level. So that's completely different. And I think, it's also interesting for ESG in general. That's why I like to. We're mostly in environmental assessments. Mm-hmm. Social assessments is a bit more qualitative. It's also around legislation, but also there's a quantitative part, basically counting heads. How many females, how many males in the organization. What's you name it. Mm-hmm. But what's also interesting about the ESG scores is, why do you want to make one single score? We're talking about 3 subjects here. We're talking about environmental, social, and governance. Why? What is it with mankind to put everything in one single score? Because, and that's a bit of the rage from the past few weeks, which is really interesting. For example, Elon Musk was on Twitter a few weeks ago, really angry. And I have to give it to him. He scored, Tesla scored lower than Exxon. Well, I think one of the biggest polluters and one of the biggest contributors to climate change besides Shell is Exxon.
And that sounds strange.
Yeah, and then Tesla is actually rated with a less good score. Of course, there's some other issues that they are suffering. Lithium in your battery is not a very nice material, and I think there's some accusations from on the social kind of the ESG rating. But then still, I don't want to compare that. That's weird, Then compare it on the E separately from the S and separately from the G. But not all these 3 together. So,
okay, got it. So, and it also sounds like a pretty fundamental human inclination. Yeah. You see it a lot by physicists. They try to make an all-encompassing formula. They've been at it for quite some time with quite some people. I haven't seen the theory of everything yet. Their work's on small and big. So.
Yeah, it's funny you note this, because I actually, and maybe that's also why. It was kind of a coincidence, but I watched the video yesterday, or at least half of the theory of everything yesterday.
Oh, really?
So indeed, why are you just chasing this one single formula? Why not simply accept that maybe there is no one single formula? It shouldn't be so hard, but
at the very least, we can say it's going to be so incredibly hard to do this well that Tesla does end up somewhere up top and Exxon does end up lower, that it's probably going to take us 50 years and a whole monstrosity of a machine learning project, let's say.
Yeah, maybe indeed, but also, we can do it today. I mean, it just takes a bit more time. I mean, if we've been with some portfolio managers starting our way of thinking. So taking, instead of the ESG approach, take our approach. Create asset level data. Actually take a look at the company that you're actually investing in, instead of some general country sector specific proxy. And I mean, also there it comes up with really interesting insights. I mean, one example we did recently was actually for the investors was really interesting. So they asked us to be, as part of the due diligence, the pre-acquisition analysis, to do a quick environmental assessment. So we did. It was the quickest organizational LCA we ever performed. Within 4 weeks. Was kind of interesting process, but really happy with the results. And the investors and also the company itself, they were actually like, whoa, the data insights that you just gave us in 4 weeks are very interesting. And then for the investors, it was extra interesting because the company just installed, I think it was like 9,000 solar panels on site. And we found out that their main contributor to their environmental impact was electricity consumption. Well, then you as an investor, like, okay, so they already have their solar panels. Because they were only installed like 3 or 4 months earlier.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So they were like, okay, so we can invest in a company knowing that their whole environmental impact next year is 14% lower. Well, that's a nice insight, right?
That's a great insight, yeah. And with the educated guesses, you cannot give any insight in actual supply chains, product development, anything. Because you're just guessing. So if you're going to do anything with your product, you want to know for sure, so you don't know. Yeah. Hey, and what about this thing? I could imagine you take an educated guess and then test that guess. So take a rating, which is pretty easy to get, or...
Yeah, well, you have to pay, of course. I mean, they're companies, they're organizations, the ESG raters, so you need to buy a subscription fee for their database, but...
Okay, yeah.
You can get them,
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of process, it's maybe not even a good way to go about it, to first do an educated guess.
First an ESG and then double check it with an organizational assessment. So we would do it.
Yeah.
You can definitely, and I think it would be a very interesting process also to see, where they are right and where they're wrong.
Yeah, that could be cool.
But in general, I mean, still, even if they are right, which would be perfect, especially because that would make me happy as well. Because there's, I think, 1,000 billion ESG investments over the past year. Well, please let them be right,
Yeah.
But still, I mean, if I have an ESG score, I still have this one single score. While if we have this environmental assessment of the actual organization and some of its products, then you actually already see, like, okay, so this is the score. If you want me to put it in a score, fine, I'll put it in a single score for you. But also you have the insight on the company level, on the different activities within the company, the different products. And you can actually, before, even pre-acquisition or when it's already in your portfolio, you can actually, as a portfolio manager, actually help the company with, hey, if we're just, I have these data insights, so maybe you should focus on this and this and this part, because that would be the most cost-efficient environmental reduction. I mean, the system, again, we're talking here with different kinds of investments. And also, I mean, there is a CEO there. So maybe you as a portfolio manager should just say, like, hey, use this, here's a budget. And please go with a organizational assessment company, help them out with you implementing your sustainable strategy.
As an investor, you can't force everything.
Indeed, you can't force it. Indeed. So that's very different. I mean, per portfolio, per company, it's a very different process. And we're used to it in the meantime, and it's actually also very fun. It's a bit of a political game there, but in general, I mean, they both benefit. And that's the point. I mean, the CEO has a company. He wants a healthy company. He has future legislative. He has a legislative risk. He has a reputational risk. He wants to should be wanting to improving its company, especially over the coming years with these regulation becoming stricter very, very fast. And on the other hand, you have this investor who's also benefiting, because if I am investing or acquiring a company at the moment, and in general we go for divestment within 5 to 10 years, well, in 8 years it's 2030. Paris Agreement, maybe some other new new legislative or regulations. I mean, there's a lot coming, and so even in your financial return, you will see it and will feel it in 8 years when it's 2030 and you're actually divesting your asset. It will. I'm convinced that it will have improved its financial performance as well, and also hiring the enterprise value or the project value or whatever it is that you invested in.
Yeah, or at the very least cut out a whole bunch of risk.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is then translating again in an extra financial return. So
for sure. Yeah. Okay, and you mentioned this twice now, the Paris Accord and 2030.
Yeah.
What term is actually described in the Paris Accord at 2030?
Yeah, it's we need to be on track to 1.5 degrees maximum global warming, right? Which is still a very, very interesting statement. I mean, if you would just say like, let's emit that amount of carbon by the time, I mean, indirectly they are saying it, but I see a lot of companies that are committing, or a lot of investors as well, committing to the 1.5 degree scenario. Well, I wouldn't even know what it actually exactly means for me in terms of how many carbon can I emit, or how many contribution to the reduction of biodiversity can I still cause. I mean, what's that? It's a very vague concept.
Is there any sub-legislation on what that should mean on practical steps that we need to take? To get to that 1.5%?
I mean, the Paris Agreement is an agreement. Then if we talk legislation or regulation from the EU, I think that's the most important body to follow in this sense. So we have a few regulations coming there. One is on corporate level, so it's called the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The other one is on any financial market participant. It's called the SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Reporting Directive, SFDR, Disclosure Regulation. That's the one, abbreviations, always fun. But they both are having the same kind of idea, which is you as a organization, whether corporate or financial market, you should disclose and report on your non-financial, so on your sustainability issues. And they do note a few specific, very specific, they call them PI, Principal Adverse Impact Indicators.
Excuse me, could you repeat that one?
Indeed. Principal Adverse Impact Indicators. So they're basically indicators that these companies or organizations should report on, that are then contributing to sustainability-related issues. And carbon, of course, is one, but also hazardous waste is one. Also, ozone-depleting gases are an important one, and biodiversity is an important one.
Okay.
And I mean, that's a very interesting one. I mean, with our way of working, we do assess, our assessments do result and show some indicators that are contributing to biodiversity loss. So, for example, soil acidification, or seawater pollution, river water pollution, what's called eutrophication, these very green ponds, the vijvers, the ponds that become very green. That's when there's a lot of eutrophicating materials in the water, which is basically the manure. From farms, for example,
manure,
cow shit.
Got it.
Then the water bodies become very green. The plants, they actually extract all the all the oxygen, and then the whole life basically dies.
Yeah.
So that's also, and these indicators, we can actually say something about the biodiversity loss that your investments or your company is actually contributing to. It's interesting still that they demand biodiversity. Well, it's important that they demand biodiversity because I really see it, and a lot of people from our field with me. I mean, we're having this kind of tunnel vision on carbon emissions, but what if 90% of the plants and the animals die? We don't even want to know. I mean, carbon is some kind of, we can model it to some extent, but a fourth or fifth extinction, we don't really know what's gonna happen,
Yeah.
So it's even scarier in that sense.
Yeah.
So actually, we do, we help them saying something about this impact on biodiversity as well. And then there's another important aspect in this SFDR. So you have this principle adverse impact indicators, which is actually reporting on sustainability issues. There's another important part there, which is called the do not significantly harm principle. Well, that's kind of easy. Do not significantly harm, and tell us how you are not doing that.
Yeah.
And especially in the SFDR, it's the most greenest investment, so to say. So they're called Article 9 products, but it's basically the most greenest investments, stating that you have a sustainable objective with your investments.
Yeah.
And then
Excuse me, I didn't quite get it. You have CFDR investments are the most sustainable investments?
Well, under SFDR...
Okay, got it, yeah.
Under SFDR, you basically have a categorization of 3 types of investments.
Yeah.
So you have basically gray investments, so to call them, Article 6. You have Article 8, which have social or environmental characteristics. So you need to tell what you're actually meaning with these social environmental characteristics and how you are managing them in your sustainable portfolio. So we're still talking investors here, asset managers, portfolio managers. So that's Article 8, social and environmental characteristics. And then the most greenest one is those achieving sustainable objectives, which are either social or environmental objectives. And especially in these Article 9 products, investments, so the most green ones, you need to show, besides these specific indicators that we talked about just, you also need to tell them how this objective and everything that's happening around is not significantly harm other indicators. So for example, I can say my investment portfolio needs to reduce 50% carbon from all its assets that I'm investing in by 2030. If I'm reducing 50% carbon and I'm just stating something by putting these requirements for reducing this 50% on, for example, a factory, I'm installing a different way of production factory which actually emitting a lot of nitrogen or so then I'm shifting away the problem from carbon to nitrogen emissions, which is then again contributing to biodiversity loss because it's the nitrogen crisis or not in the Netherlands. Different story. But this do not significantly harm actually makes you think so if I'm achieving the sustainable objective, how am I also, what is happening on the other impact indicators? And again, by the way that we do these assessments, it's both company-wide, is throughout the whole supply chain. So I actually know what is happening if I change something here. But also it's wide on its. There's 36 impact indicators there, so I can actually tell a lot, and not only something about carbon emissions.
Got it.
It's technical, but it's fun.
Yeah. If I look at it, it sounds like with the first 2 you can play sort of a compliancy game. I'll be compliant on the 50% carbon stuff, and how we solve that doesn't really matter. And on the last level, you have to look at it holistically.
Yeah.
Am I looking good, or am I doing something actually
exactly?
Yeah.
I think this is a very nice way to make a distinction between the Article 8 and Article 9 indeed. So then the Article 8 would be a bit more, characteristics, so tunnel vision on a specific subject, and Article 9 is really making you, think of it holistically indeed. And interestingly also, and that's why, then just to make the circle a bit round again, that's also a reason why I don't really believe that you can become SFDR compliant, at least when you're going for Article 9, with ESG data. Because I need to see it holistically. I need to know what is happening if I'm pushing buttons here and there, and what is happening on the other side. Well, that's not going to happen with an ESG rating, right?
Yeah. Sounds like ESG ratings in general aren't actionable.
No.
You can rate it, you
Yeah.
can guess, and then guess next year, and then guess some more the year after.
Yeah.
But you can't really act on it because you don't know where your strategic drivers are.
Yeah,
you don't know which button to push.
Yeah, exactly. And also, funny side note is that actually, I mean, I can do an ESG rating on my company from 6 different organizations, and you'll get 6 different answers. But
yeah,
that's another issue. But also, I mean, even when I really dived into the SFDR and the CSRD in these regulatory descriptions on the regulatory technical standards, delegated regulation. I mean, they're horrible pieces of text. Now I finally understand why legal advisors make so much money. But interestingly, actually, there's, even when I dive into these documents, there's actually multiple times that they're actually really specifically mentioning the way that we are working to achieve your sustainable objectives. So to achieve your Article 9 compliancy, or at least your goals, they refer, for example, to this guideline document which is produced by the OECD. What's the organization for, what is it again? Cooperating countries. I don't know. It's this very quite famous OECD organization.
For Economic Cooperation and Development.
That's the one.
There we go. Thank you, Emma.
That's the one. Yes, yes. And they have created these documents for multinational enterprises. And in this document, they are also stating for environmental impact, refer to environmental management systems, which is principle 1 in the, I don't know, there's this tool and tooling and tooling document basically there.
Yeah.
An old document. I can dive it in my archives if you want to read it. But it's actually stating like implement a environmental management system. And in I think the 3rd chapter, they actually specifically state, well, for real environmental management, adopt this life cycle assessment approach, because it gives you the insight to become a real environmental manager.
Got it.
Well, it's specifically noted at least in the EU taxonomy, and then the EU taxonomy is referred to by the SFDR. So indirectly, it's actually specifically stated in the document. So I'm still, as said, I'm wondering how these Article 9 portfolio managers will expect to be compliant with SFDR. With their ESG ratings. That would be an interesting thing to see.
Yeah.
I haven't seen how that would work yet.
All right. Well, maybe there's an Article 9. Am I taking the right one? Article 9 SFDR investment firm listening. And,
please let me know how you do this. And otherwise, I'm gladly to help you through this forest, or how would you say, jungle of methods, abbreviations, legislations.
Yeah. Okay, so if we try to map that forest for just a sec, we have the ESG ratings. There are a couple companies or organizations trying to make a framework with impact factors, etc. So they differ a little bit. The goal is the same, and they're educated guesses. And then you have the European legislation that legislates investors on making sure that as an investor you have a base level of sustainability within your portfolios.
Well, even better, I think you should put it this way. So we have 2 regulations there. Well, there's one general one, which is the EU taxonomy noted only very shortly, but it's basically categorizing what is green and what is gray.
Okay, yeah.
Then underneath there's the CSRD on the corporate level, and there's the SFDR on the financial market level. And then as a portfolio manager or, for example, private equity portfolio manager, you should, if you want to promote sustainable objectives for your portfolio, then you have to disclose and report on what we just discussed, these principled versus impact indicators, you do not significantly harm.
Yeah.
And then investors have the transparency so that they know whether they're investing in something sustainable or unsustainable. And that final part is actually the whole goal of these regulations, just transparency, that's it. I mean, go back to the story that I told you about ING stating that they are carbon neutral on their scope 1 and scope 2 and saying nothing about scope 3, but investing everything. That's the perfect case of greenwashing. And these legislations are, their main purpose is just to eradicate greenwashing.
Yeah.
Which is perfect.
All right.
Yeah.
It sounds, I don't know the specifics about the ING case, but...
No, don't. Me neither. I remember from like years ago, and I think, it's the same a bit with Shell. They made this environmental movie, right? Pollution will carbon emissions will contribute to global warming somewhere mid-90s, end 90s. I actually still have the DVD at home.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I mean, but if you would start searching for this movie now, you will not find it anymore because they just, how do you say, put it in the dove pot.
Yeah. Put it
they
under
just
the
got
rock.
rid of it. Yeah.
So, I will say that with oil companies, I don't personally think that oil companies are bad by definition. It does seem to me that we get a whole lot of benefit to society. And without energy, we wouldn't be able to get enough food, get enough mobility to sustain the societies like we can.
Yes.
So I think that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Like it seems to me like on the one hand, indeed, the transparency is insanely important because else you don't know where you are on the map.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we also need revolutions in technology to be able to do more with either sunlight or whatever.
Yeah. No, indeed, but I mean, I'm an idealist, I guess, but I'm also a realist. And of course, we would have been nowhere without oil, without gas, without concrete for that sense, without steel. I mean, they've brought us our wealth and riches. Well, not all of us, but at least like a part of us, humankind, they brought a lot of riches, and then the rest, well, they didn't, which is, of course, the social sustainable part. That's also really important. But I mean, there's a large difference. I mean, greenwashing actually means that you're actively putting activities there to diminish the opportunities for sustainable performance and sustainable improvement. And I think that's an important distinction between the two. I mean, if a Shell or an ING would just decide, let's just go with the flow and actually, just slightly decreasing our activities in this oil and gas sector and, contribute to sustainable transition, that would be a good thing. And I mean, if we say this, I'm sure if someone from Shell or ING is listening right now, he's like, oh yeah, we're doing. Yes, you're doing, but not enough, just, I mean, you're making billions and billions. Billions and billions.
Yeah.
And I mean, you should, go with the flow a bit more.
Go with, what do you mean exactly with that?
Go with the flow of a sustainable transition to a sustainable economy. What your definition is there. It's also wide range. Yeah. But I think that's also an important thing that is actually being... and then go back to the EU taxonomy. So your question, what are you meaning there with a sustainable transition? Take the EU taxonomy and just, for example, say, okay, I'm Sasker, I want to invent in an energy company. And then the EU taxonomy will tell you exactly what is sustainable and what is not. That's what it does.
Yeah.
So it's a real categorization of all these investment possibilities.
Yeah. Hey, and I just to get back a little bit out of this side branch.
Yep.
If we have let's say I have a company, I make automatic vacuum cleaners, robot vacuum cleaners, and I know I've been going at it for about 8 years. I have around 200 people, a couple production lines. I have some suppliers to give me parts, and no, you have an end of life or like past, let's say planned past production phase. And I think I might want to sell my company at some point, maybe in 4, 5, 6 years or something. At some point, I want to sell my company. Then by now, I know that most investors, or a big portion of them, is going to look, at least by 2028, is going to look at my standards around environment, social and government factors. Yeah. How do you see that in the market now? Is it already happening? Should founders be? How should founders look at this? Maybe that's the question.
What I see is that at the moment that I am, for example, saying this to you as a CEO or as a working or being a startup or whatever, then you see like, oh yeah. Yeah, whoa, you're actually right. I mean, it's also it's a thing that is for a human, it's kind of difficult to like start looking in the long term. Well, at least for us Western culture based. I mean, there's a lot of other cultures that are actually able to look a bit beyond their short-term return on investment, so to say. And I mean, for me personally and for my co-founders as well, being from our studies, the Future Planet studies, we've been trained basically with this, system-level thinking, long-term thinking, and multi-stakeholder thinking. I'm not when I look at a company I have my own company. I look at it, to the revenues and the costs, but also I'm looking to the whole system around it. I'm thinking already of what in 3 years, what am I doing now to make sure that I have the right experts in the field in 3 years. Just to give a random example, but the whole way of thinking is just a bit different. And at the moment, to get back to your question, we're seeing it not enough yet, but it's 8 years. I'm sure it will be there in 2025. It will be, I think, a lot bigger because then it's really getting close. 5 years. It will become a midterm thing, so to say.
Yeah.
I think it will be a lot bigger then, but you can better, especially as an investor and especially as a portfolio manager, you should be prepared on this already because, I mean, every company that you're acquiring at the moment or any project or portfolio or whatever that you're investing in right now is most likely being divested of either in 2030 or a few years before, so it will have an impact on your financial return then. And I mean, that's what the investor is in for, right? Financial returns.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I was thinking a little bit more from being a company owner.
Indeed. For the company owner, it's the same thing, and especially the case that you just described. I mean, especially if you're a company owner who started its company to sell it off within a few years. Take it into account. I mean, your carbon zero, low environmental impact company will be a lot more valued by 2027, 2028 than it will when you don't take this into account.
Yeah. And would you say, I don't know if you have experience with this, but I always hear from entrepreneurs that when they want to sell their company or start thinking about it, they need to set up the company entirely to make it suitable for sale.
Yeah.
Bring in standards, get everything in order. Let's say. I always hear it's an insane process to go through. Just because so many things usually need to get done still. How does that work for the sustainability part of things? Can you do it in a year, or should you do it way early? Would you save yourself trouble if you do it earlier?
Yes, definitely.
In what way?
Of course. I mean, if you, I think there's an organizational culture part which is very important there, and a routine part which is very important there. If you just started your company or are still starting your company, implement it from moment A, from T is 0.
Yeah.
If you haven't and you want to sell your company or divest your asset within a year, well, within, let's say it's 2027 and you want to divest it within a year, which is then 2028, can we do it in a year? We could, but then we would put a roadmap there, do a benchmark, a year 0 at that time, an organizational LCA, and then put a roadmap there which would then make you sustainable in X years, for example. That would be valuable at that point in time. But if you're still starting, yes, do it from now.
Yeah. What my experience with some things is that they have the character, if I want to do it last moment, it's going to be very expensive to do it last moment, and it's going to be hard to have an actual impact.
Yes, that's why you should do it now.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that was my inclination. I didn't know. Yeah, maybe you like last minute heavy.
No. Definitely not. No.
Yeah. No, I got it. And I can also imagine that just in all the iterations that you make in a product or a service, just taking these factors along in choosing your suppliers or in the design or the material choices of your product, for instance. I think you could, you might even be able to save like a whole bunch of risk. Thinking of kids' toys with materials in there that shouldn't be there, but all sorts of other risks that you could have, and you could even. Yeah, you could do a lot with that. Also, in your product branding, like I see how a brand like, for instance, Tony's Chocolonely comes out. They built it on a mission. They built it, on top, and all along the way, the mission is there, and people know it. Like, people know, even if it's not specific.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, there's some, critics, especially from the, I think, more conservative, more, conservative part of the business ethics that say, well, they are wrong because they're not promoting shareholder value, because they have a sustainable mission. They're left-wingish. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just,
more on the social side.
But I think they're just wrong and short-sighted, so to say, because I mean, in the end, and I'm sure that's the general transition that we're actually going through. We've been, as mankind, we've been through the phase that is this indeed the shareholder. Profit maximization is the most important part, and everything else can just fuck off, I wouldn't say.
You can say.
But now, I mean, there's a real transition towards, and there's so many, I mean, we're talking sustainability here, and I told you already, we're trained in systems thinking. It's not about carbon emissions on its own. It's about everything. It's about geological risks. I mean, look at all the prices for all materials now. I mean, there's one war, some lunatic decides to go into another country, and we see all these prices going up. It's not a single thing. And also with biodiversity, I think we haven't even seen the first ecosystems collapse yet. But what happens if the bee actually extincts? I mean, we're shouting this for 10 years already, but still it hasn't happened, luckily. On the other hand, I would say maybe it would be nice if maybe in the Netherlands it would happen, and then we can just find out what it actually means if it happens, and then we have an actual example of what would happen, and then we can show it to the rest of the world, and they're like, okay, that's real shit, you know. Maybe we should indeed. So it's not a single thing. It's a wide topic that it. I mean, I see the world as a giant metabolism or a giant ecosystem where everything is interconnected, right? If some links fall away, well, nothing happens. But if one link falls away, well, then you have a problem.
Everything happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, let's hope we get some test cases before. Which gets hard when everything's global, pretty much. But yeah, I got it.
Yeah. Indeed.
And that makes me think, like, for every company they'll have different drivers that they should address, because it's the character of the company. So that's maybe that's the gist of the story.
Indeed.
That indeed an educated guess is nice as a starting point, but at some point you want to measure something.
Indeed. Well, there was this. I don't know the name, but I'm sure that the business students will know who I'm speaking of. There's this guy who once said, "You can't manage what you can't measure." Well, I fully agree. I mean, I'm not managing my country without my company without insights on my financials, right? You're looking at your cost structure. You're looking at your costs. I mean, you need to be economically viable, economically sustainable as well. So you use these measure points to manage your company, and that's the same with the environmental management. You first need to create all these data points, whether it's a house that you're building, or a company that you're building, or a portfolio that you're building. It doesn't really matter. You need to have these measures, these points, and then you can actually actively manage on them. And then indeed, I mean, again, on our life cycle assessments, on our LCAs, we can get 36 data points out of it. And then, but not all 36 are relevant. And it's company or portfolio dependent. Match it with the sustainable objective of your Article 9 portfolio, and then say, like, okay, for example, I have this objective, so we can take these 5 data points out of the 36 that are important. Or I am in this electronics. I'm a corporate in the electronics industry. So I take the data points that are important for my, soil pollution with the mining activities, or the resource, how do you say, like the extraction of resources, because it's all, they're all rare earth resources. So, you really, indeed, you can take these data points out there, which are most important for the specific case, and then take these to manage upon.
Yeah. I could even imagine that you invest in a couple companies that have a sustainability weakness. They use a lot of cobalt in their batteries. And you acquire a company, and let's say the other companies don't make their own batteries, but they source them.
Yeah.
And you acquire one company that has the revolutionary technology to do batteries without cobalt. And without other heavy metals, of course.
No, indeed. I mean, in short, you need to measure what you manage. And I think for portfolio managers or asset managers, especially in the private equity, I mean, you have this opportunity to create all this data. So don't manage your portfolio on ESG data. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I can't find one way. The only thing that I can, that it makes sense is because it's a lot less labor intensive, of course, to create this data.
Yeah.
So there's a short-term financial benefit there for not having to spend a bit more money on a bit more consultancy. But I mean, in the long run, the potential extra financial returns that you can make by divesting Paris Agreement aligned companies in 2028, well, I mean, that's a lot better, right?
100%. And I can imagine that like you said, the data that comes from the actual measurements gives you operational insight onto actually how to improve your company. So, sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah, I
Very
agree.
Interesting and wildly interesting market, man.
Yeah.
that it's very technical. I would find it hard to do it for my own company.
Yeah.
So happily I got these neighbors, but yeah. No, that sounds very nice.
Yeah.
So Joost, if anyone wants to reach you, how should they go about it?
Well, I think you can visit our website first, www.hhc.earth, and then Earth like planet Earth, of course.
Planet Earth.
Or send me an email directly, Joost at www, is that right? Oh, that's completely
Joost.
wrong. HH. Joost at hhc.earth. And it, of course, then the website is www.hhc.earth. Yeah, and just get into touch. I mean, also, my mind keeps on raising. I have so much more links and anecdotes that I want to to put on the table here. But let's take it easy. Maybe let's do it next time. You know?
Let's do it next time for the next episode, man. Yeah, sounds fantastic. But
dive a bit deeper on the corporate level or the startup level. There's a lot more nice insights there as well.
Yeah, it would be very cool to hear about what kind of steps can startups take that most startups don't really see. Like, what are the strategic drivers for most startups? Cool.
We go into venture capitalist portfolios there.
Could also be very cool.
Yeah.
Then, thank you very much for being here, man.
Yes,
it was a pleasure. Anytime.
Same for me.
And
Anytime.
See you downstairs next time.
Yeah, and you know where to find us, huh?
I do. Hey, thanks Joost, and see you soon.
Thanks.